first run we're going to talk about, I'm going to call like a steady or one-sided run. And we'll just kind of quickly jump through that. All right, and we're back to our steady, not shifty. Typically this would be like an onshore breeze, a sea breeze. I know in one of the previous calls somebody mentioned Palma. Palma sea breeze would be a classic, steady and slightly one-sided run, where we're going to be really thinking about, maximizing VMG, maximizing boat speed. We're not going to do very many jibes. There's not really a lot of decisions to be made. The mindset is very patient, relaxed, using this decision timeline concept that we talked about in some of the earlier weeks of, 1 minute to the jibe, 30 seconds to the jibe, 15 seconds to the jibe. And then that one jibe that you make, that one decision in the corner will end up being a very important decision for your race. So we've got the set being a really critical decision on this one-sided run. The corner game, we could call it a few different things, but I've kind of used that term throughout. It's just calling it the corner game. We're really just thinking about having a clean air window and having gate set up coming out of that jibe, and then the gate down at the bottom. So just diving into this sort of steadier one-sided run a little bit more. This is a concept that is really similar to the kind of the left exit game that we talked about before of there being some really standard lanes that people are really fighting for. And, obviously in a one-sided downwind like Palma or something like that, you're going to get a huge number of straight setters, and you're going to get a big lineup coming down that first standard lane. And then you get the decision of where to jibe, and of course the leaders are going to take the best lane, and just like upwind, the best lane is often the lane that involves no overstanding and no risk of overstanding, but going as far as you can, because the further you go, then you make that next jibe back a little bit simpler. And if that corner was favored, you get to go into that corner a little bit deeper. And of course, not everybody gets the best lane, so there's lanes on either side of that, and those lanes all have positives and negatives. On the far side of the best lane is a pretty decent lane in a lot of ways. I mean, you might get a little deeper into that corner, you might get a little more favor, but you're going to start to trade that off with a lot of risk of overstanding and a risk that if you are in bad air, you really have no options. You're going to have to ride back in that bad air the whole way. And that early lane can look pretty tempting, and it usually works out quite well for a while, but you may have traffic issues later with using that lane. And then Luther wanted me to mention the alternate option, which of course we sometimes see the top boats try out if they're having a bad race, or can be effective of just getting completely away from that major lineup coming out of the straight set and just taking the complete opposite way down the course. Now, it's pretty steady conditions, so we don't want to do a ton of jibes, but that jibe set, get away from other boats, use your boat speed if you have it, can work out pretty well. So we've kind of put that up as like an alternate option. What I want to do first is show a few kind of common mistakes with this approach. One of the most common mistakes, and the first jibe is not necessarily the mistake. I mean, red's gone 70% of the way to lay, and they've taken the nice kind of conservative early route back. And then I'm going to also put yellow on there. Yellow's taken the alternate route. And I just need to move my little pop-up window so I can actually see this. So I'm going to put the first mistake on. And I think that this is yellow jibing a little bit before lay line, now putting them into a position that they're going to end up in this sort of cone of bad air that occurs down opposite the gate. And the leaders can cross through that cone because the cone really isn't bad when you're in the top, 3, 4, 5 boats. But if you're anywhere near the middle of the fleet, this zone of the course can get pretty ugly. And so yellow, I think, has made a mistake by coming back early from the alternate lane And in this example here, I'm going to have yellow and red meeting at the same point. And red has made what I think is a pretty terrible mistake, which is to not cross behind yellow and to jibe on yellow. And this just sets up a really ugly situation for both boats. Both boats are now heading into this sort of bad air cone. Yellow is, of course, in red's bad air, as well as bad air from other boats. And the further they get in here, it just keeps getting worse because, you know, now yellow's going to try and roll red back when they jibe back. They're going to be doing a jibe, you know, inside the cone with someone right on them. And I think it's likely to be a pretty negative run for both these guys. And I think that sets up originally with yellow jibing too early. And red taking that early lane is okay as long as they're disciplined about ducking any starboard boats that are not on the ley line. And taking that extra jibe back before lay into the cone is where things really start to go bad for red.
So I'm going to reinforce what you said there with yellow and red. I mean, one kind of nuanced way to look at this is if we say that red, you know, goes 80% of the way to the corner and then jibes, that's a pretty safe option, that good chance of clear on the way back if you jibe back a little bit before ley line, and you still maybe have options for either gate mark. Doing the same thing in reverse, yellow to the other corner, you think you're being a little bit cautious there by coming back a little before the ley line, but that puts you in a really bad spot, like Tim says. And just remembering the difference between those two things, that, you know, almost all the way to the corner for yellow is much worse than almost all the way to the corner for red. And you know, I would say it strongly enough that red jibing there on yellow, that's breaking one of the golden rules that we believe, which is don't be on starboard not laying either gate mark. There's times where you do it, but you know that you're violating one of the rules, and so you must have a very, very good reason to do it. And the windier it is, the more absolute that rule is. Because you end up, and the reasons for that are because someone to leeward and behind you, the windier it is, the more they can hang air behind and still be okay and still stop you from jibing and crossing. And the windier it is, the worse it is to be waiting for someone else to jibe, and then you trying to jibe on command, and maybe you're low for the gate, and, you know, that leads to all kinds of, you know, boat handling difficulties and, you know, possible flipping, possible rules situations, being low, the people coming around, going upwind. So that's a golden rule, is to don't jibe onto starboard, not laying either gate mark. And another way to say it, as you approach the cone down there near the gate, jibe at the first ley line and don't jibe until you get to the first ley line.
Zooming out for a second, you know, you said it well in the beginning. Opportunity in these classes is massive on the first run. And one of the things I was discussing with these guys is in races where you're rounding mid-fleet or worse, you've got one chance in this kind of racing to get back in the game. If you round the first gate poorly, it's very unlikely you're going to make a comeback in a race. So the two things that I like to emphasize here, and one reason we're going to go under the microscope with a lot of this, is that hesitation is one of the biggest enemies of people that are still figuring out the downwind. You know, you slowly gain the knowledge and you kind of think you're doing the right move, but it's when you compare the ekers and the really good people downwind, you just see it in their actions. They come around a mark and they don't hesitate on what they think is going to happen and how they play it out. So you see that at the top, and you definitely see that at the bottom. I think the bottom is where it can be feeling really good, and then you can be shocked at how many boats you can lose at the bottom of the course. So clear air, I think we want to emphasize clear air, and we want to give you a lot of snapshots so that when you're on the course, you don't hesitate and you can make the right moves.
Yeah, and this idea of like avoiding the cone, and when you get to that last jibe of really committing to ley line is something that I definitely learned from watching Eaker. He would have no hesitation of, making sure that he was committed to not being in that cone at the end of the run, because he was looking to pass people, and you don't pass people in steady conditions by going through that cone.
So that does bring up a good point about the sort of the bigger picture. How are you passing people? And you're not passing people by doing some great things. You're passing people that make mistakes and sail a bad run. That the reason that there's a lot of points on offer is because there's a lot of people that aren't going to VMG in clear air for the entire run. And this sort of, brings us back to, one area, at least, labeling wise, where, Tim and I might see this differently. He's saying, hey, steady wind the edges. And the way that I look at it is the losses that if you're in the middle of the fleet, or say anywhere from upper middle to lower middle, there's a whole bunch of points on offer. The points on offer are the people that screw up and sail bad runs. And the two places, coming in before the gate happens where there's a lot of losses going on are just out of the set that Tim's going to talk about. There's winners and there's losers from the set. And the other one is out of the corner, the straight set going 80, 90% of the way to the corner, and then people start jibing. There's losers from that too. And those are the main points that you're going to gain by doing something else. That's the two places where there's a bunch of points on offer. And let's say maybe there's 4 or 5 points on offer in each of that. If you round a relatively, big fleet short course race, 25, 30 boats, and they're all tightly packed, there's 4 or 5 at the top, and there's 4 or 5 at the corner who are the big losers. And then from that, you'll come into the gate, and then obviously we know there's a lot of losers there. And if you look at this from the point of view of how can I make sure that I'm not a loser, Tim's saying, hey, minimize jibes, and it's relatively steady. I'm feeling more like the way to make sure that you're not a loser is to not worry as much about how many jibes you do, but just focus on being in clear air and being able to VMG for as much of this run as possible. It's kind of like the mindset that you have when you're off the line and you realize you're not going to hold your lane, and you make the first tack and your priority shifts to keeping clear air for the whole beat. Here, your priority shifts to being in clear air and being able to not get jibed on and keep VMGing. And the bigger the waves, the more crucial this is, because you don't want to have any sort of ups and downs have to be dictated to by other boats. So if you look at his yellow and green and blue lines, it's clear the course you would take if all you cared about was staying in clear air. You would straight set for anywhere from 20 to 60% of the run, and then you would jibe across the middle where people are not jibing, and then you would avoid the yellow-red mistake that he shows by either playing it out all the way or jibing back well before the first gate lay line. where people are much less likely to jibe on you. And the gains you have are, you know, the losses are possibly one extra jibe. The gains are just sailing more in clear air. And presenting yourself in places out of the traffic flow so you're less likely to get jibed on.